Just for a second, think back. Can you remember the smell of your old school? You know, that weirdly specific mix of chalk dust, floor wax, and old books? We've all been there. We all have those memories. But have you ever stopped to ask, where did this whole idea of school even come from?
I mean, really picture it. The rows of desks, the teacher at the front of the room, the bell that tells you when to start, when to stop, when to move. It's such a universal experience, it feels like it's just always been there.
Okay, now hold that image in your head, and let's swap out a few things. Instead of iPads, picture clay tablets. Instead of pens, chisels. We're talking 4,000 years ago, in ancient Mesopotamia. And yes, they had schools. They were called eduba. But their purpose? Whoa, it was nothing like what you'd think.
So yeah, school is ancient, we get it. But that's just the when. The real question, the one that changes everything, is the why. Why do we even do it this way? Where did the actual ideas that run our schools today, where did they really come from?
Well, the answer isn't simple. It's this incredible story, packed with falling empires, explosive revolutions, and a constant burning fight over what it even means to teach someone. And that's the story we're diving into today. Welcome to The Vernacular Vault.
So let's get right to it. The first schools weren't built to enlighten people or help them find themselves. Nope. They were invented to solve a huge problem for the world's first empires. How on earth do you manage everything?
The answer was simple and kinda genius. You create a special class of people who can read, write, and do the math. You create scribes. So these first schools in Mesopotamia and Egypt, they were basically factories for government bureaucrats. And you couldn't just sign up. Oh no. Access was strictly for the sons of the wealthy and powerful. The curriculum was all business. Learn the script, do the math, keep the records. And the teaching method? Brutal discipline. Because the goal wasn't creativity, it was flawless, identical execution, every single time. And this right here, this set up the very first great divide in education. Think about it. Knowledge for governing the state, stuff like science, medicine, writing, that was taught in formal, high-status schools. But the knowledge for actually building the state, architecture, sculpture, engineering, that was seen as a trade, a craft. It was passed down through apprenticeships, totally separate from the so-called intellectual elite.
So for centuries, that was the deal. Education equals control. But then something shifted. Over in ancient Greece, this absolutely radical, world-changing idea started to take root. What if education wasn't a tool for control? What if it was a tool for liberation?
I mean, this was a massive philosophical leap, a total 180-degree turn. Plato's Academy, which is basically the ancestor of all modern universities, just completely flipped the old model on its head. The goal was no longer flawless execution, it was rational inquiry. The method wasn't obedience and conformity, it was embracing a diversity of perspectives through constant debate.
The Romans saw this and thought, hey, we can build a system around this. For them, the most important skill you could have was rhetoric, the art of persuasion. The Roman educator Quintilian said it perfectly. The whole point was to create the perfect orator. The entire educational machine was designed to produce a citizen orator, someone who could stand up in a court of law or debate in the Senate. All of a sudden, education was training for public life.
And then, Rome fell, and the whole system just crumbled. Europe was plunged into a period of chaos, what many call the Dark Ages. Libraries were destroyed, knowledge was lost. The challenge was immense. How do you preserve the wisdom of the past and somehow build a foundation for the future?
What happened next was incredible. Two massive, parallel efforts unfolded to save human knowledge. During the Islamic Golden Age, amazing centers like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad became these intellectual powerhouses, translating and synthesizing everything they could get their hands on, from the Greeks, Persians, and Indians. At the exact same time in Europe, you had monks in monasteries and scholars in new cathedral schools, painstakingly copying and protecting the very foundations of Western thought.
Okay, so they saved all this knowledge, but how do you actually process it? Well, medieval educators developed this powerful mental toolkit called the trivium. This wasn't just a list of subjects. It was a three-part framework for how to think. First, grammar. Know the rules of language. Second, logic. Learn how to reason. And third, rhetoric. Learn how to communicate your ideas persuasively. It was like a mental operating system for your brain.
And they put that mental toolkit to the ultimate test in the new universities with something called disputatio. Now listen, this was not a casual chat. This was an intellectual gladiator match. A formal, high-stakes public debate with strict rules of logic. It was intellectual combat, and it was the primary way you proved you had mastered a subject. You had to defend your ideas against the sharpest minds around.
You know, the whole idea behind the disputatio, it was about more than just winning an argument. It was a commitment to the power of ideas, a belief that through rigorous debate, we can all get a little closer to the truth. And honestly, that's the same spirit that drives what we do right here.
We really believe that everyone should have a chance to engage with the big ideas that shape our world. So if you agree, join our community. Hitting that like button, sharing this, and subscribing, it really does help us keep this conversation going. All right, so after the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, things are really cooking. But the world was about to change again, and in an even bigger way. The Industrial Revolution and the rise of modern democracy created a whole new set of demands, and education had to adapt, and fast. And right away, a fundamental conflict kicks off that we are still living with today. On one hand, factory owners needed a disciplined, obedient workforce, so you get models like the Lancasian system, where one teacher drills hundreds of students in rote memorization. It's perfect for training factory workers. But on the other hand, you had reformers like Horace Mann shouting, "Wait a minute, a democracy can't survive if its citizens can't think for themselves." They fought for schools to be free, tax-supported, and compulsory for everyone.
You can see this whole struggle play out so clearly in the United States. It starts way back in 1647 with a religious reason. Kids need to read the Bible. By 1837, Horace Mann is pushing this radical idea of common schools for all. And by 1851, it's law in Massachusetts. You have to go to school. But the fight over who gets access to that education and what kind of education, well, that continued for another century, leading to landmark battles like Brown versus the Board of Education.
So what's the point of all this? It's that when you walk into any classroom today, you're not just walking into a room. You're walking into thousands of years of history. All of its ancient arguments and unresolved tensions are still echoing in the halls.
We've covered a ton of ground. We saw how it all started with those clay tablets, where education was purely a tool of imperial control.
Then we saw that spark in ancient Greece, that revolutionary idea that school could be about creating citizens capable of debating their own futures.
And we followed that thread through time, as all those different ideas, control, liberation, preservation, and democracy, all got woven together into the massive, complex global system that we have today. Which leaves us with the one big question, the one that's been debated for 4,000 years and is still completely unresolved. What is the purpose of school today? Is it to train an efficient workforce, or is it to liberate the human mind? That's not a history question. That's a question for every single one of us. And how we choose to answer it will define our future.